Welcome to the debate. To kick things off today, I want you to just imagine for a moment that you are holding a freshly picked lemon,
Oh, I like this. Setting the scene.
right? Let us really imagine it and enjoy it with examples today. So you're holding this lemon, you can see the vibrant, pitted yellow skin, you can feel the slight waxy resistance against your fingertips,
Hmm.
and then as you slice into it, you hear the crisp parting of the rind. You smell those sharp citrus oils just erupting into the air.
And when you finally taste it, I mean, your mouth instantly waters, right? Just a total involuntary response to the acidity.
Exactly. But here is the real question. What exactly happened in that split second? I mean, are you simply this biological machine running an objective chemical assay?
Or is your brain actively constructing a subjective reality out of thin air?
Right, and that is the question at the heart of our source material today, the symphony of perception, a guide to the five senses. We're really looking closely at how we should fundamentally understand our sensory organs. And, well, I represent the perspective that the answer is pure engineering.
And I represent the view that it's all an interpretive emotional synthesis.
Yeah, because from my side, human perception is just an absolute marvel of biological machinery. I mean, our senses are these highly specialized precision instruments. They are perfectly evolved for the objective translation of physical properties, designed entirely so that we can, navigate and survive in a highly dangerous physical world.
And, while I absolutely agree that the biological mechanics underlying our senses they're awe-inspiring, really, I view the ultimate result entirely differently.
How so?
Well, the physical inputs you just described, like the light waves bouncing off the lemon, the air pressure from the rind snapping, the airborne molecules, they are completely meaningless on their own. They possess no inherent color or sound or scent. Perception is primarily an interpretive, emotionally bound synthesis.
Okay, but
The brain acts as a maestro, right? Taking these chaotic, completely random physical inputs and actively constructing a subjective reality. We don't just record the world like a passive security system, we creatively conjure it.
I think to really test that, though, and have to start with the text's most compelling analogy, which is the eye as a biological camera. Because when you really examine the visual system, you don't see a maestro.
You don't?
No, you see a mechanical framework designed with the kind of objective precision that human engineers still struggle to replicate. So imagine you are a filmmaker. Your eye doesn't just act like a camera conceptually, it operates on the exact same physical principles of optics.
Okay, sure, the refraction.
Right. Light enters and is physically bent, refracted by the cornea. And if you've ever, say, stepped out of a dark movie theater into the bright afternoon sun,
Oh, yeah, that sharp, painful blindness.
exactly. What's happening in that exact second is your pupil physically shrinking. It is acting exactly like a camera's iris, closing its aperture to prevent the delicate sensor at the back of your eye from being overexposed by a flood of photons.
Right, the optics are undeniable. I mean, it's a remarkable mechanism for capturing light. But you are describing the lens of the camera, not the photograph it produces.
But even the sensor itself is purely mechanical. When those photons hit the retina, they strike highly specialized photoreceptors. Your rods act as your night vision gear, operating in low light conditions to prioritize shape and movement over color.
Which is why we can't see colors well in the dark.
Exactly. In a dark room, you can navigate around a coffee table, but you can't tell if the couch is navy blue or black. And then you have your cones, right? The high-definition, color-rendering sensors that require high-energy, bright light to fire. So our interaction with the world here is a direct, objective translation. Physical photons enter, mechanical apertures adjust, and specific cells translate those exact photons into electrochemical signals based strictly on their wavelength.
It's a data collection device.
Yes, it is a precise, calculating data collection device.
I understand the appeal of the camera metaphor. I really do. But have you considered what happens immediately after that precise mechanical data collection?
Well, it goes to the brain.
Right, because the text makes it incredibly clear that while this machinery is real, the ultimate result is an entirely subjective creation. Let's stick with your optics for a second. The physics of the eye's lens dictate that the image projected onto the back of your retina is actually upside down.
That is true. It's inverted.
So, if we were purely objective mechanical data recording devices, as you suggest, we would experience the world inverted. We would navigate a world where the sky is at our feet, but we don't.
Because the brain corrects it.
Exactly. The brain receives those raw, upside-down electrochemical signals and does the real magic. It flips the image. It compares the slightly different angles from your left and right eye, and it paints a three-dimensional depth that does not actually exist on the two-dimensional surface of the retina.
I wouldn't call it magic, though. I mean, that synthesis is still strictly rooted in objective physical geometry. The brain is just, running a geometric calculation to correct the lens distortion.
Rooted in geometry, sure, but not defined by it. Let's take the cones you mentioned, the ones that supposedly render color.
Okay.
The physical world out there is just a chaotic soup of electromagnetic radiation. There is no such thing as the color red or blue floating out in the universe. There are only different totally silent wavelengths of light. Color is a subjective psychological hallucination created entirely within the dark expanse of your skull.
A hallucination! That's a strong word.
But it fits. Perception isn't just data entry. Your brain is taking the chaotic physical world and weaving it into a coherent, meaningful experience. You aren't watching a documentary of reality. You are experiencing a heavily edited, emotionally scored film.
Well, that's a fascinating way to look at vision, though I would frame it differently when we move to other senses. Because the idea of an emotionally scored film might sound poetic when discussing colors, but it gives way to pure, unadulterated physics when you look at the architecture of the ear.
You think hearing is purely physical?
Completely. If the eye is a camera, the ear is the ultimate vibration translation machine. Let's trace the journey of a sound, not as a feeling, but as a literal kinetic event. So, imagine a drummer striking a cymbal.
Okay.
That physical action displaces air molecules, creating a literal wave of pressure. When that wave enters your ear canal, it physically strikes your tympanic membrane, your eardrum, exactly like a drumstick hitting a skin.
All right, so the air is physically pushing against the tissue.
Exactly. But here's where the engineering gets brilliant. This vibration has to be passed into the inner ear to be processed. But the inner ear is filled with fluid, and fluid is much heavier and denser than air.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever tried to run underwater, you know it requires vastly more force than running through the air. Air pressure alone hitting the eardrum isn't strong enough to ripple that fluid. So what does the biological machine do?
It adapts.
It uses a mechanical amplifier. The vibration is passed to the ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes. These are the three smallest bones in your body, and they act as a system of levers. They take the broad, relatively weak vibrations of the eardrum and concentrate all of that kinetic force down onto a tiny footprint called the oval window. It is basic, perfect mechanical leverage.
It's an evolutionary workaround, yeah, to the problem of moving from an air environment to a liquid one.
It is staggering engineering. And once we pass that window, we enter the cochlea, the snail-shaped fluid-filled chamber. Inside this chamber is a membrane lined with thousands of tiny, delicate hairs.
The cilia.
Right. As the ossicles punch against the oval window, the fluid ripples. Because of the tapering physical shape of the cochlea, high-pitched, fast waves cause vibrations at the stiff base of the chamber. Low-pitched, slow waves travel all the way to the flexible apex.
Like a piano.
It is quite literally a biological piano. A specific frequency of air pressure mechanically bends a specific physical hair, triggering a specific electrical impulse. Your brain doesn't actually hear a sound. It just reads a spatial map of which hairs bent inside that tube. It's a binary code, a literal piano roll, that proves perception is just objective data entry, mapping the physical environment.
I come at it from a different way.
Go on.
I look at that exact same biological piano, and I see the profound mystery of interpretation. Yes, the cochlea operates like a piano, striking specific keys based on the frequency of the fluid wave. But a piano is just a collection of wood and wire until there is a player to strike the keys, and more importantly, a listener to experience the music.
But the listener, in this scenario, is just the auditory cortex processing the spatial map of electrical signals.
But is it just processing? I mean, think about what you are actually saying. The ear is taking a physical phenomenon, the rippling of salty fluid in a microscopic tube, and translating it into neural electricity. But that electricity is not sound.
Well,
If a tree falls in a forest and there is no brain there to synthesize the rippling air pressure into the subjective experience of a crash, there is no sound. There's only air pressure. The transformation from mere fluid dynamics to the soaring crescendo of a symphony, or the terrifying crack of thunder, or the comforting cadence of a loved one's voice is a monumental leap. The meaning, the emotion, the subjective reality of the sound is entirely constructed by the brain.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Sight and hearing deal with things at a distance. They process waves, light waves, sound waves. And that distance leaves room for this philosophical interpretation of symphonies and meaning, because the threat or the reward isn't touching you yet.
Okay, fair point.
But what happens when the physical world crosses the threshold into your body? When we look at our chemical senses, our proximity senses, that romantic view of perception falls apart entirely. Let's look at the tongue. Taste or gustation is not poetry. It is a molecular chemistry lab running a rigorous, relentless quality control assay.
A quality control lab? You don't think a perfectly cooked meal is a subjective, emotional experience?
Culturally, sure. But biologically, the survival of the organism depends on stripping away the emotion and doing cold, hard math. Your tongue is covered in papillae, housing your taste buds, which are constantly analyzing the molecular structure of everything you put in your mouth.
Testing for nutrients.
Testing for fuel versus threat. We have 5 main modalities, and every single one is an objective, binary calculation. When your receptors detect carbohydrates and sugars, we experience sweet. That is an objective alert that says high-density energy is here. Consume this to power the machine. When we taste salty, we are detecting sodium ions, which are mechanically essential for nerve conduction and muscle contraction.
So you're arguing that even the pleasure of eating is just a tricked-out survival imperative?
Entirely, and the negative tastes prove it even more clearly. Sour detects acidity, which serves as a primary warning sign for bacterial spoilage. You taste sour milk, and your body involuntarily rejects it.
True. The gag reflex is pretty fast.
And bitter is perhaps the most critical calculation of all. It is an evolutionary arms race. It is nature's alarm system against alkaloid toxins found in poisonous plants. Every time you eat, your tongue is acting as a border patrol agent, objectively breaking down chemical signatures to decide if a substance will sustain the biological machine or destroy it. It is pure, unadulterated survival mechanics.
I won't deny that the tongue serves a critical survival function, and avoiding toxins is obviously paramount. But your argument relies on isolating the senses and ignoring the broader context of how they wire into the brain.
How so?
If we look at the other chemical sense, the nose, that purely utilitarian view completely shatters. The sense of smell, olfaction, proves that our senses prioritize emotional resonance and memory far above simple data processing. The nose is not just a chemical analyzer. It is a chemical archivist.
But hold on. Olfaction operates on the exact same lock-and-key chemical binding mechanism as taste. Airborne molecules drift into your nasal cavity, dissolve in the mucus of the olfactory epithelium, and bind to specific receptors. A molecule of sulfur binds to a receptor, and you register the smell of a rotten egg. It's chemistry.
It is chemistry, but look at the architecture of the wiring. It is fundamentally different from vision or hearing or touch. When you see a tree or hear a dog bark or even taste a lemon, that sensory data goes first to the thalamus.
The relay station.
Right. The thalamus is the brain's sensory relay station. It acts like a switchboard, routing the raw data to the conscious, logical processing centers of the cortex. But smell? Olfactory neurons are the only neurons in the human body that are directly exposed to the outside environment, and they bypass that logical relay station entirely.
Wait, hold on. When you say the olfactory neurons bypass the thalamus entirely, are you saying there's literally no logical filter between a scent and the emotional reaction to it?
That is exactly what I'm saying. They have a direct, hardwired line straight into the limbic system. They plug right into the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Oh, wow. The centers of the brain that govern feeling and memory?
Yes, this is why olfaction is a chemical time machine. Think about the implications of that architecture. You can logically know that a loved one has been gone for 10 years, but the sudden smell of their specific perfume in a crowded elevator doesn't just give you the data point. Perfume is present.
Right. It hits you.
It forcefully, instantly transports you into a visceral, emotional state of grief or longing. You smell petrichor, the scent of rain on hot asphalt, and suddenly you are 10 years old again, standing on your childhood driveway. The physical architecture of olfaction literally prioritizes emotion and memory over logical processing. That proves we are not just survival machines sorting fuel from threat. We are emotional creatures, constantly weaving physical inputs into a subjective historical tapestry of a life lived.
I hear the poetry in that, I really do, but I have to push back.
All right, let's hear it.
Even that emotional recall serves a survival mechanism. Remembering the exact scent of a predator's den or the specific smell of a safe water source and tying that scent to a powerful emotional memory of fear or safety, that is highly utilitarian. It ensures you don't forget the lesson.
I suppose you could frame it that way.
But if we really want to test whether perception is about subjective emotional tapestry or raw physical survival, let's look at the ultimate boundary of this biological machine. The skin. If smell connects our internal emotions to the outside, our skin physically defines where that internal world ends and the dangerous external universe begins. The skin is your largest organ, and it is the ultimate security array.
It certainly handles a massive, unending stream of environmental data.
Staggering amounts of data. And it does so through an incredibly complex network of highly specialized receptors. Take the mechanoreceptors. You have Meissner's corpuscles situated close to the surface of the skin, perfectly calibrated to detect the lightest stroking or the microscopic slipping of an object from your grasp, allowing you to unconsciously adjust your grip.
Deeper down, you have Pacinian corpuscles that detect deep pressure and high-frequency vibration. You have thermal receptors acting as internal thermometers, constantly calculating the gradient between ambient temperature and your core temperature to trigger sweating or shivering.
A highly sophisticated, responsive thermostat.
Precisely. But most importantly, you have nociceptors. These are the survival-critical damage detectors. When they detect extreme heat, freezing cold, or mechanical trauma, they don't just objectively report skin integrity is currently being compromised.
They yell at you.
They bypass conscious thought entirely. Through the spinal reflex arc, the signal goes straight to your spinal cord and shoots right back out to your muscles, screaming, "Move away now." Before your brain even realizes your hand is resting on a hot stove, your muscles have already contracted to pull it away. You feel the pain a second later. This vast, complex security array proves that the primary, overriding role of perception is the physical maintenance and protection of the organism's borders. Everything else is secondary.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
You are looking at the skin purely as a defensive shield, a security system designed to keep the world out and keep the blood in. But I look at that exact same stream of tactile data, and I see the very foundation of human consciousness. Yes, the nociceptors protect you from a hot stove, but without the constant, unending hum of baseline data flowing from the skin to the spinal cord and the brain, we wouldn't just lack physical safety, we would lack a sense of self entirely.
Wait, how so? The sense of self, your ego, your consciousness, that's a high-level cognitive function. It has nothing to do with whether your skin feels a breeze.
But the cognitive function relies entirely on the tactile boundary to know that it exists. The skin doesn't just protect the body, it conceptually and psychologically defines where you end and the world begins. Imagine the sensory deprivation tank experiments.
Okay, the isolation tanks.
Right. You are floating in water calibrated to exact body temperature. It is perfectly dark. It is perfectly silent. As the tactile feedback from the skin fades away, because there is no temperature gradient and no pressure, people don't just feel relaxed. Many begin to lose their physical boundaries entirely.
Interesting.
They report feeling as though they are expanding into the water or dissolving into the space around them. It is a profound, sometimes terrifying dissociation.
Because the spatial map is going offline.
Exactly. The brain requires that constant barrage of physical pressure, temperature, and texture, not just to avoid a hot stove, but to continuously construct the concept of I. The external world is pressing against us, and in the resistance to that pressure, the brain actively imagines and asserts our existence. When you take the physical inputs away, the self begins to evaporate. It is the ultimate subjective synthesis. The machine doesn't just measure the world, it needs the world to know it's a machine.
Well, that is a phenomenal point about the psychological weight of tactile data. So, to summarize where we have landed today, I maintain my stance that when we look at the source material, we see a story of magnificent biological engineering.
Right.
Whether it is the eye acting as a highly sophisticated camera, physically adjusting its aperture to light, the cochlea functioning as a perfectly tuned mechanical piano mapping fluid waves, the tongue running objective chemical assays to avoid alkaloid toxins, or the skin operating as a vast, reflexive security array, our senses are miraculous, specialized instruments. They are tasked with one primary objective goal, which is navigating a chaotic and dangerous physical world so that the organism can survive.
And my summary is that mere survival is only the baseline. Yes, the physical inputs, the silent wavelengths of light, the kinetic vibrations of air, the chemical signatures drifting through a room, they are chaotic and mechanical. But those inputs are entirely meaningless in a vacuum. The brain is the maestro that receives those electrical pulses and synthesizes them into an emotional, subjective reality. You are not just a camera or a lab or a security system. You are a living symphony, constantly turning the sterile physics of the universe into the profound, deeply felt experience of being alive.
I think where we absolutely converge today is on the sheer complexity of this translation. I mean, we both agree that the external physical world is inherently chaotic, just raw waves, vibrations, and molecules crashing into us, and that human perception, whether viewed as a survival mechanism or a creative synthesis, is an incredibly sophisticated process of bringing order to that chaos.
Absolutely. The transition from a vibrating air molecule to the subjective experience of hearing a melody, or from a lack of pressure to the disillusion of the ego, is one of the greatest marvels of existence, regardless of how you frame the purpose behind it.
Which leaves us with a beautiful realization about what it actually means to be a living, breathing sensory instrument. We invite you to pay closer attention to your own sensory experiences today. Notice the way the aperture of your pupil physically adjusts when you step into the sunlight. Pay attention to the sudden, unbidden memories that arise when a familiar scent bypasses your logic and transports you through time. There is so much more to explore in this material and in the everyday miracle of your own perception.
We leave it to you to decide. The next time you hold a ripe lemon, feeling the waxy rind and smelling the sharp oils, ask yourself, are you simply a finely tuned biological machine objectively measuring physical properties to survive? Or are you the conductor of a sensory symphony, actively creating the reality you live in?
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time on The Debate.